Have you ever imagined that an ordinary morning commute could turn into a ride straight to death? In just a matter of minutes, the sound of the train horn fades into silence, replaced by screams, twisted metal, and blood splattered across the tracks. But what shocked everyone wasn't the crash itself, it was the man behind it all, still alive. He watched from a distance. He was the one who was supposed to die, but instead, he left dozens of innocent people to die in his place. Welcome to Cold Blood Files channel. This is the place where we dive deep into real-life crime stories, not just to tell you what happened, but to help you understand why it happened. If you're drawn to true crime, mysterious cases, and the dark side of the human mind, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and make sure you never miss an episode. Today, we're uncovering the haunting case of Juan Manuel Álvarez, the man who turned his failed suicide attempt into a tragedy that killed 11 and injured nearly 200. It was one of the deadliest train crashes in Los Angeles history, but beneath the wreckage lies the story of a broken soul, and a society that let him fall through the cracks. This case will not only send chills down your spine, it'll make you ask a terrifying question: how many lives can one desperate man destroy? The sky had not yet broken into dawn. Los Angeles still slumbered under a soft, lingering fog. It was around 5 a.m., January 26, 2005. Inside a small house tucked away in Compton, Juan Manuel Álvarez was unraveling. He hadn't slept. He'd been fighting with his wife for hours. She walked out on him, slamming the door behind her, leaving him alone in that cold, silent space, with his rage, and something darker. No one knows the exact moment he made his decision. But sometime before dawn, Álvarez stepped into the kitchen and grabbed a fruit knife. He looked in the mirror. He slashed his neck, then stabbed himself in the chest. But it wasn't enough. He needed something faster, more certain. And that's when the idea struck him: a train. Around 5:45 a.m., still bleeding and barely coherent, Álvarez climbed into his gray Jeep Grand Cherokee. He didn't call for help. He didn't wrap the wounds. Instead, he drove, straight through the foggy streets of Glendale, toward a section of train tracks that was poorly guarded, no crossing arms, no gates. The perfect place to die. He pulled onto the tracks, cut the engine, rolled the windows down, and sat still, waiting for the train, for death. But death, as it turned out, wasn't as simple as he'd hoped. The headlight appeared in the distance. The rumble of steel on steel. The wailing horn of Metrolink train number 100 grew louder, like a scream. Álvarez started to shake. Something inside him resisted. The primal urge to survive clawed back. In a split-second decision, he threw the door open, jumped out, and ran. Ran from the tracks. Ran from the train. Ran from the suicide he had orchestrated. But as he fled, fate collided with steel. At exactly 6:03 a.m., Metrolink train number 100 departed Los Angeles. It carried nearly 300 passengers, workers, students, parents, people just starting a normal day. Minutes later, the engineer saw it. A Jeep, parked directly on the track. He hit the horn, slammed the emergency brakes. Too late. The train struck the vehicle head-on, ripping through it like paper, derailing the first cars and causing a massive chain reaction. A freight train from Union Pacific, running the opposite direction, crashed into the wreckage seconds later. Carriages twisted. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. People screamed, trapped, crushed, thrown. Some died instantly. Some were pinned between iron and fire. Some remained alive, but sat for hours next to their loved ones' corpses. 11 dead. Nearly 200 injured. It was one of the worst rail disasters in California's modern history. Firefighters worked for hours to pry survivors from the twisted wreckage. Some had limbs torn off. Others were barely conscious, their bodies shredded. Some wept while holding the lifeless hands of those they loved, unable to move, scream, or even close their eyes. And Juan Manuel Álvarez? He was alive. He had escaped the crash, and now, blood-soaked and disoriented, was hiding just a few blocks away, behind a fence in Atwater Village. He wrapped his wounds with his bloodied shirt. He thought he could disappear. But he was wrong. The man who tried to kill himself survived. 11 strangers, people he never met, died instead. So who was Juan Manuel Álvarez? And why did his pain turn into a massacre? Among the 11 people who died that morning, Juan Manuel Álvarez was not one of them. In fact, he was the only one who had planned to die, yet survived. And when police found him, bleeding, disheveled, curled up in a bush near the tracks, they weren't sure whether to call him a victim or a killer. Juan Manuel Álvarez was born in the U.S. to Mexican immigrant parents. His childhood was nothing short of a nightmare. His father was an alcoholic who beat his wife and kids. His mother had severe mental health issues. Some days she showered him with love, others she threatened to kill them all. When Juan was just 10 years old, he watched his mother set herself on fire in front of him, a memory that left a deep and permanent scar on his psyche. He grew up in ruins. Poverty. Domestic violence. Emotional neglect. At school, he was bullied for being odd, slow, and distant. No friends. No safety. No escape. He began to shut down. As an adult, Álvarez never held a steady job. He worked odd gigs, manual labor, auto repair, warehouse lifting, anything that would pay for food and rent. But nothing lasted more than a few months. He'd be fired for erratic behavior, or simply stop showing up. He became more and more isolated from the world. No friends. Family long gone. Trust. Completely shattered. In the middle of all the chaos, there was one constant, his wife, Carmelita. She was the only person who ever believed he could change. They got married, moved to a tiny house in Compton, and had a child together. But that fragile hope quickly unraveled. Juan was jealous. Possessive. Violent in subtle but terrifying ways, he'd cut his own arms with razors during arguments, saying, "Look what you made me do." Carmelita started to fear him. She left many times, always returning for the sake of their child. But that final time, she packed her things and disappeared into the night. He called. She didn't answer. He cried. She stayed silent. And he collapsed, one more person who turned their back on him. In the early hours of January 26, 2005, Juan stood alone in his kitchen. A small fruit knife in his trembling hand. He stared into the mirror, almost as if confronting a stranger. He stabbed himself in the neck, then the chest, but didn't die. He didn't want to die at home. Didn't want his son to find the body. So, he thought about the train tracks. Quick. Clean. No mess for anyone to clean up. He drove to a quiet section of the Glendale train line, no gates, no guards. Parked his Jeep on the tracks. Turned off the engine. And waited for the train. But when he heard the distant horn blaring, panic overtook him. His survival instinct screamed. He jumped out of the car and ran, leaving a ticking time bomb behind. When the Metrolink train crashed into his abandoned Jeep, triggering a horrific chain reaction, Álvarez was already hundreds of feet away, hiding in a bush behind a fence. He heard the metal scream. He heard human voices turn into howls of agony. He didn't scream. He didn't run to help. He didn't call 911. He just watched, as 11 people died in his place. As the sun finally rose over the California sky on the morning of January 26, 2005, what rescuers saw at the crash site resembled a bloody nightmare brought to life. 11 dead. Nearly 200 injured. Train cars twisted like crushed paper. For some, their final sound was a muffled cry beneath tons of mangled steel. But the strangest detail: the driver of the Jeep, the very cause of the catastrophe, was not among the victims. Around 6:30 a.m., just 30 minutes after the crash, Glendale police received a call from a concerned resident. "There's a man hiding behind the fence near the tracks. He's covered in blood, looks disoriented." Minutes later, emergency responders found Juan Manuel Álvarez. He was crouched like a shadow under a tree, clutching his chest, blood seeping from wounds on his neck and torso. When asked for his name, Álvarez gave no clear response. He just muttered over and over, "I didn't want to kill anyone. I just wanted to die. I didn't mean for this to happen." At first, authorities believed it was simply a failed suicide attempt that resulted in a tragic train accident. But Álvarez's own statements during police interrogation changed everything. He admitted intentionally parking his SUV on the tracks to commit suicide, walking away from the scene without warning anyone, seeing the train approaching, yet doing nothing to stop it. When investigators examined the site, they found that the Jeep wasn't stuck. Álvarez could have easily driven it off the tracks if he had wanted to. There was no engine failure. No oil leak. Just a choice, to leave the car and walk away. Less than 48 hours later, Juan Manuel Álvarez was charged with 11 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors refused to view the case as just a personal tragedy. They declared he knew his actions could kill others. Parking on live tracks to die is not a private choice, it's a public massacre. It was no longer about one man's pain. It became a legal war, forcing the justice system to answer a terrifying question. If someone tries to die but fails, and ends up killing innocent strangers, are they a victim, or a mass murderer? Álvarez's attorneys swiftly built a defense centered around his mental illness. They presented evidence showing he believed demonic voices were following him. He heard voices telling him he didn't deserve to live. He had previously attempted suicide multiple times, cutting himself, overdosing, crashing into walls. He had a history of untreated depression, personality disorder, and schizophrenia. But prosecutors pushed back hard. He had the presence of mind to drive to a specific spot, park between two crossing arms, and run away as the train approached. That's not insanity, that's a cold, cowardly calculation. As news spread, America was divided. Some saw Álvarez as a dangerous maniac who deserved the death penalty. Others believed he was a product of a broken mental health system, someone who never meant to hurt anyone. But for the victims' families, there was no gray area. If he wanted to die, he should have done it alone. Not taken our husbands, wives, children, and parents down with him. The day Juan Manuel Álvarez entered the courtroom, America held its breath. On the stand sat the faces of unimaginable loss. A wife without her husband. A child without their father. A mother grieving a son who had just graduated college the day before. They were all there to look into the eyes of the man who shattered their worlds, waiting for the justice the law had promised them. Prosecutor Trudeau, the lead attorney, didn't just speak with facts, she spoke with the fury of a mother, a citizen, a witness to horror. She painted Juan Álvarez as a man who had every opportunity to stop, but chose instead to run. A man who wasn't confused, but was intentionally destructive. This was not a failed suicide attempt. This was a mass killing by proxy. She laid out the evidence. Álvarez chose a section of track with no crossing gate, making it easier to access undetected. He deliberately parked his Jeep across the rails, right as a commuter train approached. After jumping out of the car, he did not call 911, did not warn anyone, he just ran. To the prosecution, every action pointed to one chilling truth. Juan Manuel Álvarez didn't just want to die. He wanted the world to suffer like he had for years. The defense, on the other hand, told a tragic, deeply human story of mental illness. They portrayed Álvarez as a child who witnessed his mother set herself on fire. A teen who never received proper psychiatric care. An adult haunted by severe depression, delusions, hallucinations, and repeated self-harm. His attorneys pleaded. Juan is not a killer. He is a sick man. He had no ability to comprehend that his actions could cause such devastation. They presented old medical records, testimony from doctors, and witnesses who heard Álvarez say he was possessed by demons. But nothing struck harder than the words of the survivors and families left behind. A grieving mother, her voice shaking, stood and said, "I don't care if he was sick or not. I only know my son was burned alive in that train car. And he is the one who made that happen." Another survivor, who lost a leg, spoke through tears. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear the screeching of metal, the screams. And I see Álvarez's face, calm, as if nothing had happened." After over a month of testimony, dozens of witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, and sleepless nights for the jury, the verdict came. Juan Manuel Álvarez was convicted of 11 counts of first-degree murder, receiving the maximum sentence, death. The court declared, "No one has the right to weaponize their pain against society. Suffering is not an excuse to kill." When the sentence was read, many cried, not in celebration, but in a deep, unhealable grief. No punishment could bring back the dead. No apology could ever mend those shattered lives. To some, Juan Álvarez deserved to die. To others, he was simply the tragic outcome of a society that ignores its most vulnerable, until it's too late. The trial had ended. The killer was sentenced to death. But the tragedy? It was still very much alive. No punishment could erase the scars burned into the memories of those affected. And in truth, no one walked away from that courtroom a winner. When the sentence was delivered, families of the victims quietly left the courtroom, some weeping, some too numb for tears. An elderly father held his daughter's photo, his voice hollow. I dreamed of walking her down the aisle, not carrying her coffin. A 6-year-old boy, now an orphan, whispered. I still hear mommy's voice in my dreams. But when I wake up, there's only silence. The loss wasn't just of people. It was a loss of futures, of unfulfilled dreams, of stories that were never written. Over 180 people survived that night. But survival is not the same as healing. Some spent years relearning how to walk after losing limbs. Others couldn't sleep more than a few hours due to crippling PTSD. I lived, but part of me is still trapped in that burning train car, hearing screams that never stop. For them, surviving became a war against memory, a daily struggle to find meaning in a world forever changed. Alvarez's case wasn't just a catastrophe. It was a merciless wake-up call for America's broken mental health system. One had begged for help multiple times, asked for psychiatric support, but was turned away. No insurance. No space. No time. If someone had listened, could this have been prevented? This wasn't just one man's collapse. It was a failure of an entire system that turns its back on silent suffering, until that silence explodes. Did Juan Alvarez deserve to die? Or were we executing a man who was already destroyed long before that night? One journalist wrote, "Yes, he was a murderer. But he was also a product of poverty, of childhood trauma, of a society that looked away." We punished Juan Alvarez, but were we really punishing ourselves for letting it get this far? January 26, 2005, will always be a dark wound in U.S. history. Not just for the lives lost, but for what it revealed. How fragile people are. And how dangerous silence can be. On paper, the case is closed. But in the hearts of the victims, in the memory of that burning train, it still lives on. Now I ask you, do you believe justice was truly served? Or did we just find a quick ending to a slow-burning disaster? We've just walked through a journey cloaked in shadows. A journey where the destination wasn't justice, but a mass grave for hope, trust, and the last flickers of humanity. They called Juan Manuel Álvarez a murderer. But if you listen closely, you'll hear a deeper truth. He wasn't the only one who killed. Silence did. Indifference did. Every shrug, every closed door, every "not my problem," bled someone out slowly. Some died instantly, on the tracks. But many more died slowly. In the hollow eyes of a mother who buried her child. In the sleepless nights of survivors haunted by flames and screams. In the heart of a 6-year-old, still waiting for a voice that will never answer again. And one day, even the screaming stopped. Not because it was healed, but because no one was listening anymore. Thank you. For staying. For not turning away. For being here, until the very end, where most people choose to look away. If this felt like stepping into a real-life nightmare, a place where truth is colder than fiction, then leave a trace. A like. A comment. Or maybe just, subscribe. so we can keep exploring these forgotten echoes, where darkness and truth walk hand in hand, and the voices of the unrest will never be silenced again.